Hello, welcome to Ray-ality TV. I'm Raymond Bakari. Today I'm joined by one of the three Providence Ward 3 City Council candidates, Sue AnderBois. The incumbent City Councilwoman Nerva LaFortune is running for mayor, thus opening up this seat for the 2022 election. The ward also contains the neighborhoods of Mount Hope, Hope Village Summit, Collier Park, and Blackstone. Miss AnderBois, how are you today?
Hi, I'm doing really well. Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you on. My first question here, you're one of three candidates running to represent Ward 3 in 2022. Can you tell those watching a little bit about yourself and why you're best to represent the ward?
Yeah, so hi to everyone watching. So my name is Sue AnderBois, and I have been a Providence resident for about a decade and immediately jumped right into the community. So I've spent my career as an advocate for things like environmental issues, climate justice, food system issues, food security, housing, all sorts of things. And did the same as soon as I arrived here in Providence. So I've been involved from, hour two, actually. I attended my very first food policy council meeting and have been involved in just a variety of different policy activities at the city and state level. And with Councilwoman LaFortune deciding to run for mayor, saw that it was a good opportunity to, and seeing so much change happening in the council, I was excited about the opportunity to bring that experience and those connections and relationships and experience and dedication to progressive causes to the city council.
Speaking of the climate justice is one of the many issues you plan to address on the city council, as it's highlighted on your campaign website's platform section. This can be approached in quite a few ways, and it's an issue that both your opponents are also prioritizing. Are there any specific ordinances you would introduce or support to achieve climate justice in the city?
Yeah, most definitely. So I've been a big supporter of the implementation of the climate justice plan, which was created in partnership between the city and the Racial and Environmental Justice Group. It was really a landmark plan that was created by the city and endorsed by the city, but also in deep collaboration with frontline communities of color. And so I've sat on the Providence Sustainability Commission for the last 6 years, and I was the chair for the last 4, and have really prioritized how we really reoriented our commission in how we can best support that work. And so helped put forward and pass an ordinance this past summer in partnership with Councilwoman Anthony and others that codified the goals of that plan, as well as expanded the Office of Sustainability, and then also expanded the commission that I have been chairing and recently stepped down from to explicitly include members of youth members and members of the Racial and Environmental Justice Committee, so that they would, even after I leave, have a guaranteed seat at that table. Things that I would prioritize, one is a lot of the things that are in that plan, but things like building benchmarking, which is a key piece of how we're going to meet our efficiency goals, and frankly, really shocking that a city like Providence hasn't passed such bedmark and frankly or bedrock and frankly not terribly difficult to implement legislation. So would work on that right away. And there's already an ordinance that's been introduced on that. And I've been working to get that passed for the last few years. I would also work to expand funding for climate justice. I've been looking at various models from across the state, including the Portland Clean Energy Fund, which funds environmental justice work through a small tax on large international businesses that are based in their city, and have been talking with leaders from there. And would also really prioritize how we spend those climate resiliency funds and climate mitigation funds in, move the decision-making outside of City Hall and into the communities that are most impacted. And so looking at models like that across the country and for here in Providence. So those are some of the big things that I would work on should I be elected.
Helping out small businesses is another priority you highlight on your campaign's platform. Small businesses have been struggling during this pandemic. From your perspective, what could be done on the city level to support our small businesses?
Yeah, there's a lot that we can be doing at the city level to support small businesses, particularly those that are locally owned and locally controlled here in Providence. So a few things. So one is so I used to work for the state. I was the state's director of food policy and got to work with just hundreds and hundreds of amazing small food businesses. And one of the great things about living in Providence is the amazing food and all the food businesses here. So I learned really quickly how many barriers we put in front of really small guys trying to run 1 or 2 person shops. Like a lot of the hoops they have to go through, confusing processes, and it's the same at the state and the city level. And I've made a joke, you shouldn't need like a PhD in how government works to be able to like own and operate a small business here. So one would be really working alongside city staff to make sure that those processes work for small businesses, and really making sure I'm talking regularly, especially with those here in Ward 3, what their experience is like. And we have a lot of brick and mortar businesses here, like on Hope Street, on Camp Street, Rochambeau, like all the different parts of the neighborhood. And also we have a lot of like independent workers who work outside of their home or who work within their homes. We have a lot of independent contractors, like folks who own their own consulting businesses, or, all sorts of things. So we have a lot of different types of small businesses in this ward. And so I've been talking with a lot of them about what their challenges are. I think two other things that I'm particularly excited about are, one is so city budgets are more moral documents. So how do we ensure that the city, as it's spending its large budget every year, is doing so in a way that supports Providence-based small businesses, particularly those that are owned by women and people of color? The way that we do procurement is often based solely on least cost or least price. And vendors that have worked with the city this gets a little wonky, but vendors who've worked with the city for a long time kind of know how to work that system, and know how to like get themselves in there. And so it's not as open for new and for new businesses or businesses who haven't interacted with the city, but the city could be doing a lot to shore up, especially like women and minority owned businesses. So working to update how we do procurement and ensure that we are meeting our goals. So we have goals around working with minority and women owned businesses that we just never meet. So how can we make those enforceable and hold ourselves accountable? And also, if we're finding barriers to why folks can't participate in the system, what are we doing to address that? And how are we building out either the capability or fixing our own internal processes to make that work? So for example, when I worked for the state, this kind of like food business connection to large institutions was a large priority of mine. And we were also finding that like one of the barriers was it took, I think it was between 60 and 90 days to get paid out. Large businesses can absorb that. Like if you are a giant business, you can move your money around and, absorb that kind of waiting. If you're a 1-2 person shop, no way can you wait 60 to 90 days to get paid for a large contract. So things like that, like the nuts and bolts of making sure that the city works for our small businesses. The final thing, sorry, I'm so chatty, is so I'm part of this group called the Local Return, and we're really focused on how we build community wealth and wealth in our communities, and kind of that next step after buy local, but how do you really invest locally? And so we're looking at, how do we make sure that innovative models like co-ops, community-owned businesses, neighborhood trusts, things that move wealth into communities and move like business ownership and other forms of ownership into community controlled hands can thrive in our city. And so we've seen a little bit of that now with the new white electric co-op that opened up last year. There's another co-op in Central Falls outside of the city bounds. There's a new housing co-op, I think on the west end. But ensuring that we make the process for doing that type of business accessible and encouraged in the city of Providence, so that people can really own their own enterprises themselves and keep the wealth and keep the wealth in their own communities.
This next one is more of a Ward 3 specific related question. This is one I've asked all three of the candidates that are running in the ward. There have been meetings focused on a North Main Street corridor revitalization study. In your opinion, what could be done to revitalize the North Main Street corridor?
Yeah, I've been attending those meetings and excited that they're looking at it. I think there are a lot of things we could do to really revitalize North Main Street. And I've been loving hearing some of the ideas that our neighbors have. North Main Street is tricky. And given especially like the different ownership of the various pieces of land there, and kind of connecting North Main Street to the rest of the ward, like North Main Street feels can feel very separate from Camp Street or Hope Street or other parts of the ward. It feels like its own thing. So things like, how do we increase non-car transportation to get people actually like walking on North Main? I try and walk on North Main as much as I possibly can to like, walk from place to place. And there's almost never anyone else walking on North Main. So I think it's filling up some of the empty spaces that have been empty for a long time. Some of the businesses that have, either gone out of business or just the empty lots that exist. I'd love to see us figure out what is going on with the ability to have affordable housing on North Main. There are some spots that seem like that could be potentially ideal for that. And are there, dig in on what some of the barriers for building additional housing in the ward could be. Mobility, I've already mentioned, and I've been really inspired by some of the things that are happening in the Olneyville neighborhood around Kinsley and Sims with the new Farm Fresh building, things like that. And I think we need to bring that type of spirit to North Main and stop thinking about it as just this place you drive through and like a place that could be a really vital community resource. I'd also love to see, and this seems minor, but I don't think it is, I'd love to see more access for regular residents to the cemetery. The cemetery closes at a certain time of night, and I know that a lot of folks who walk on foot try to cut through it to get between North Main and where the Benny's used to be. Like, I think it's a Chipotle now, there's other stuff in there. And it closes at a certain time of night. And some of our neighbors also have built like little pollinator gardens in there and things. And so like really connecting that space, which is essentially a giant park in some sense, connecting that to the rest of the ward as well, because the ward continues on the other side of that part, on the other side of the cemetery as well. So not letting that be kind of cordoned off space, but like, how can that be part of the community and let people kind of access it for walking and other community activities. Those are some thoughts. Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
It kind of sounds like the vision that I'm hearing for Triggs Golf Course near Rhode Island College, where they're talking about housing and parks. My next question is more of a citywide issue, since even though you'll be elected to represent Ward 3, you would also make decisions that would affect the city as a whole. For example, the city's pension system is one of the key issues heading into 2022. There are a variety of solutions being proposed on how to fix it. For example, a proposed $500 million pension obligation bond is on the ballot for voters to, from what it sounds like, to essentially give their stance on the solution on June 7th is how it sounds. From your perspective, what could be done to fix the city's pension system?
Yeah. Big one. So the city's pension system is a huge problem. And unfortunately, it's one of those problems, like a lot of giant problems, that there's no one silver bullet. It's going to be a lot of different things. I was initially fairly skeptical of the pension obligation bond. I have a lot of skepticism whenever we bring Wall Street or, giant business into the workings of local government. And also, this problem is so large. And I followed the pension working group process for the period of time it went on. I think it was like fall through just a few weeks ago when they presented their final report. And I've talked with members of that pension working group to really dig in on the details. And it does seem like the POB, the pension obligation bond, has really been refined in the last 6 to 9 months since the mayor first proposed it. So I would be supportive of the pension obligation bond as an initial down payment on how we extract ourselves from this from the pension issue. But it's not a silver bullet. More things will need to be done in the future. And it's vital that we address the pension issue, because I don't think folks really realize like how much of the city budget is eaten up by our pension obligation. And it is prohibiting us from being able to invest in a lot of other things that are vital to the current residents of the city of Providence. And so while it's incredibly important, we, hold on, hold on to our promises to the folks who are getting those pensions. Like, they were city workers, they did great job, and they were promised benefits. And I'm a big supporter of unions and what they negotiated. We can't hamstring what we're able to do for the current residents of the city of Providence and future residents, knowing that we're facing things like our housing crisis, growing food insecurity, issues with the schools. Like, we have so many current large problems that we need the resources to address. So I'm cautiously or reluctantly supportive of the pension obligation bond, and also am grateful that they are putting it on the ballot for all voters, because it is something that we should all weigh in on. And that's typically how like large bonds work in Rhode Island, that they end up going to all voters. And so when this was initially not going to do that, I was skeptical of that process, because this is a big enough investment, and that is our typical process, that voters get to vote on the bonds. That I'm glad to see that that's happening. I hope that we get good turnout. A June 7th ballot is a tough time. Like, people aren't necessarily paying attention, but it is important that it happens before. My understanding is it needs to happen before the General Assembly leaves session, which is usually around June 30. So, I mean, it's urgent enough that it can't wait for the fall when the other elections are coming.
And the state also does have to make the decision. If this passed with flying colors, 90-10, for example, for a percentage wise, the state still has to decide on it. Like you had mentioned, it isn't the silver bullet that's going to completely eradicate the problem of the pension system. Not like a solution, because I don't want to armchair quarterback, but one idea I hear, and there's actually a bill. I don't want to reference the bill because it hasn't been introduced yet. That a few reps and two senators and a rep are planning to introduce that would essentially allow the city of Providence to tax institutions like Brown University, PC, that typically don't pay taxes and own a large chunk of the land. Not referencing the bill, but that idea in itself, are you supportive of an idea like that?
Yeah, I'd want to dig in on the details. I think it's tricky to tax nonprofit corporations, and like, where is that line? Because nonprofits are tax exempt by federal law. And so, not being a lawyer, I don't know the like ins and outs details of what that looks like for the state to do that, and where the line would draw. Like, is it like nonprofits with a certain size endowment or something? Like, where does that line get drawn? I think will be really important. It's one of those things where the details matter, but I am very supportive of Brown and others paying more for their fair share for being residents of the city, technically residents of the city of Providence, tax-free. The pilot agreements that they have negotiated are too low. And compared to other schools of comparable size and comparable endowments, it's paltry comparatively. And I think Brown and other schools bring a ton to the city of Providence. Like, we definitely benefit by them being here. And also, we miss out on a lot of taxes, and especially for buildings that are non-mission critical. So a lot of the buildings that are not academic and outside of the 501c3 mission of like a large corporation like that, a nonprofit corporation, like, there must be ways that we can increase the amount that they're paying, either in taxes or payment in lieu of taxes, particularly with all the new buildings that like Brown University or really Brown are building out downtown. So I'd have to look at that specific bill. I've been a lobbyist at the General Assembly for a long time, and the devil's always in like the details for any specific bill. But that kind of idea of like, how do we increase what they're paying? We're seeing schools like Harvard, Dartmouth, Yale, like all of the schools of comparable size with large endowments, and Brown's endowment increased by like 50 to 100% with the stock market where it is right now. So we're seeing other schools step up to the plate in the way that we haven't seen Brown. So I would love to see, I would love to work on solutions that would change that.
I've joked.
I'm excited to see that legislation. I'll have to keep my eyes out.
Yeah, I actually have covered it. There's 2 episodes dedicated to where, I mean, it hasn't been introduced yet, but I have interviewed the Rep Morales, who's introducing on the House side, and Senator Dell, who's introducing on the Senate side. Those for those watching, those are up on the channel too. Just shifting to the next topic. Aside from the pension system, public safety is another key issue that will be on voters' minds this election cycle. There are a number of ways candidates running for office in the city have proposed to, what I've heard is reimagine what public safety should look like. What's your vision for public safety in Providence?
Yeah, so I think reimagine is a good word. So when I think of public safety, I don't necessarily think, I think people initially are like the police, that's public safety. But when I think about what safety means, to me, it also means like our air quality. Like, are we safe in our homes? Like, can we breathe the air? Can we drink the water? Will either of those things poison us? And currently that's not the case in Providence, like, especially in certain communities. Like, we have really high incidence of lead in our pipes. And some have proposed some really groundbreaking or some really aggressive, in a good way, investments to remove the lead from the pipes across the city of Providence. And we have tons of lead still in this ward in our pipes, both in the parts that are owned by Providence Water and the parts that are owned by residents. So there's like the separate infrastructure. So I think about all of those as part of public safety as well. And sometimes when people say, oh, like you can't say defund the police or, underfund, we've already been defunding a lot of public safety for a long time. So like there's almost no enforcement of environmental harms that happen across the city and other types of things that aren't things that are under the purview of the police. So I try and think of it in a broader sense as well. Then when it comes specifically to the police, I think there's some reimagining to do with what the role is. There are things that seem to fall pretty squarely within the bounds of what police can do. And also they're right now responsible for a lot of things that frankly should not be under their purview. Like I've been chatting with folks who are police or who have police in their family, and a very high percent of cases that they've talked about are, showing up for domestic violence cases where, they're reluctant to do much, or the people calling are reluctant to even ask for much, because if you have a record, if you have a police record, it can make you ineligible for some forms of housing later down the line. So it's like they need the public safety piece, which could maybe potentially better be served by counselors or community workers. But there's no one else to call. And so they call the police. I was also this past week or about a week ago, as you probably saw, there were Nazis in Ward 3 on Camp Street at the Red Ink Library. And Ward 3, as you probably already know, is also home to a really high concentration of Jewish residents, as well as historically, it's an African-American district as well. And so while the Nazis were at Red Ink, they were in a community that is filled with people who have been traditionally or historically targeted by Nazis. And the response has been almost nothing. I mean, I'm grateful that the police did show up. They showed up very quickly, and the crowd did disperse. But in follow-up, there hasn't, the follow-up has mostly been, if an incident happens again in the future, please call us. Or if you're going to do an event at this library, please give us a call and we're happy to provide detail, which is great. And I'm glad that they're there as that kind of resource. And also, I would want us to see, what are we doing about prevention? So I attended this past week, Rhode Island has a commission on prejudice and hate crimes, which I've recently learned about. And so I attended their most recent meeting to talk about what happened on Camp Street. And they're now setting up a task force with that commission and the AG's office, and I'll be sitting on that task force to think about what can we be doing around prevention and really monitoring our streets and our communities to make sure that this activity doesn't pick up steam. Because it sounds like my understanding is that they believe some of these Nazis were coming from out of state, but we don't know if they're recruiting new members, who from in-state was part of this. There are other activities that are happening across the state. So really want to make sure we're focusing on prevention. I think the last thing I'll say is we're seeing an uptick in crime in Providence, but also across the country. And some of that is part of this national trend of, we're seeing this like growing bifurcation between, the economy of people who are invested in the stock market and the economy of regular people, and just the desperation. And like the last 2 years have made it worse with isolation of poverty and food insecurity and housing insecurity, and all of these insecurities like mixed together. There's growing just desperation and unrest, and we need to get at some of those deep issues. And on City Council, this will be my priority to really think about things as a system. How do we make sure that we are getting people into housing, getting people good, life affirming jobs and life sustaining jobs, and really building wealth in our communities so that folks don't have to turn to, folks don't have to, turn to crime, or that there isn't this level of like desperation or depression or mental illness that's all built into public safety. And so that was a really long-winded answer, but those are some of the things I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about public safety. That's not just the police, it's all these other things coming together.
Shifting the topics and looking ahead to what 2023 could look like if you're elected, there are a few committees on the city council. For example, you have finance, ordinances, claims and pending suits, public works, planning, the list goes on. Do you have a specific committee you would like to be on if elected?
I'd be excited to serve wherever I could. I'd particularly be excited to look at finance or to sit on finance. I think that the city council, one of the primary things the council does is control the city's budget. And so being able to be in that seat, I also am someone who, I've been the treasurer of organizations on boards. I have an MBA. Like, I am a very detail oriented, budget focused person, and really think that, as I said earlier, budgets are moral documents. And so it's like the largest piece of policy I think that we really oversee at the city council level. I would want to be an eagle eye on that finance committee, looking at all the details and making sure that our budget is supporting the city of Providence to the best way possible.
If you're elected in January 2023, one of your first votes could be selecting the new city council president, because the current city council president, for those watching, is John Agliozzi. He's term limited. This will be his last year as council president. So January 2023 will be when the city council could vote on that. Are there any specific city councilors in mind you would like to see in the council president role?
No specifics in mind, but I am very excited about what's happening on council with this is the first time we're seeing term limits come into play. And so there'll be a lot of new councilors where there's also some open seats like the one I'm running for. And so it'll be interesting to see how who the new council is, who gets elected. And I'm excited about some of the folks who are likely staying on, and would love to see some of them step up into leadership, but no one in particular is standing out. And I'm someone who this is going to sound cheesy, I really believe in like radical collaboration, and so would want to be able to work with whoever is elected to as president to best represent Ward 3 and best serve the people of Providence. So would really just want to make sure that I work well with whoever ends up getting elected.
It is a big decision that will take quite some time before that vote would even occur. One decision, however, that is getting closer since we're in March, and for reference for those watching, the statewide primaries in September in Rhode Island, and one of those elections will be the Democratic primary, basically the de facto mayoral election in the city to elect the next mayor. There are 4 Democrats running: Michael Solomon, who was the former council president, former director of administration Brett Smiley, Gonzalo Cuervo, who was deputy secretary of state, worked in city government under a few administrations, and the city councilwoman who's representing your ward currently, who's now opening up the seat to run for mayor, Nerva LaFortune. Are there any of those 4 candidates that you plan to put your support behind for mayor?
I haven't. Frankly, I'm excited about this mayoral election. Like, for the first time since I've lived in Providence, there's so many good choices. And I think they'd all have, I know Brett, and I've met Gonzalo, and I know Nerva, and I've talked with all of them about their plans and their goals. I've gone to some of their events. And I think they'd all be very different mayors, but all have the best interest of the city of Providence at heart. And so I would be excited frankly, I'd be excited to work with any of them. And I think that one of the issues now in Providence is that the mayor and the city council are constantly at loggerheads, and nothing can move forward when they're just trying to take political pot shots at each other. So I would frankly be really excited to work with any of them, because when it just becomes about these political pot shots, it's like the people lose. We're not getting things done in that case. So I haven't made an endorsement for any of them, but for any of those 3. And I haven't really spent time with Michael Solomon, so I can't really speak to him, but would welcome the opportunity to sit down and talk with him.
Is there a timetable for any endorsement? Because the primary is in September.
No timetable for me to make an endorsement, but I will let you know if that changes.
My final question is shifting to the non-political topic. For my final question, it's one that I ask everyone here on the show to keep tradition, and that is, in your opinion, what do you think Rhode Island is best known for?
Food. Yep, I think Rhode Island is best known for our food, and I think rightly so. And I think that only got better with like the calamari comeback of the DNC last year. But I think rightly so, we're known for our food. And frankly, having lived in other places, our our food, like more people can enjoy our food. It's more affordable and like you don't have to than a lot of other places. So I've lived in San Francisco, I've lived in the Bay Area, I've lived in New Haven, I've lived in a lot of New Jersey, New Hampshire, New York. Like we have some of the best restaurants in the country, and also you can just walk right in. Like it's amazing. So I think we're known for our food, and it's rightly so. That when you asked that, the first thing that came to mind was that song that Rhode Island is famous for you. And I also feel like Rhode Island is famous for like everyone knowing each other. Like you're 1 degree of separation from just about everyone in this state, and it's delightful.
It's so true. I just had to ask you because I'm not from Ward 3. I the only time I was over there was semi recently when I had interviewed Corey Jones. Is there any, because he mentioned there's a couple food places that are the must go tos in Ward 3. Are there any places that you have that are must go to for someone who isn't from the ward?
Oh yeah, totally. You should come on by. There are so many. So I really love, well, I love all of them, and I'm a regular at Wara Wara. Definitely on a cold day like this, their ramen is like top notch. Let's see. I love India. I live right by Not Just Snacks and Not Just Spices, and love them both. Not Just Spices, true to its name, is Not Just Spices. It's a little grocery store, and you can get the best avocados in the city there, which is kind of a unexpected nice find. So if you're ever like, oh, I need an avocado that's perfect today, somehow they always have them. And even when they don't feel like they're going to be, you get them home and they're perfect. But they have tons of like Indian spices and anything you might need. And yeah, just there's too many, but those are the ones off the top of my head. I also love shopping at Rhody Craft and Stock and Frog and Toad. Those are my go-to for gifts and just whimsical things. So definitely just like walk up and down Hope Street. Oh, and I love the new place on Camp Street that's been there for about 1.5 years. Oh shoot, what is its name? Oh, this is killing me. They have amazing like rice bowls and things. You definitely have to go there. It's right next to, it's basically like between Red Ink and the Mountain Hope Community Center. So definitely check that out too.
I'll definitely have to check that out next time I'm around that part of the city. Ms. AnderBois, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure of mine to have you on.
It's been really enjoyable. Thank you so much, Raymond, for inviting me.
Absolutely, anytime. And thank you for watching this episode of Ray-ality TV. If you want to see future episodes as soon as they're posted on this channel, please click both the subscribe button and post notification bell icon to the right of it down below. I'm Raymond Bakari. I'll see you on the next episode.